Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 29th installment of the Galen Data Medical Device Innovation Webinar Series. I'll be your host today. My name is Dwayne Mancini. I'm the CEO and Managing Partner at Project MedTech. Today, we'll be hearing from Jan Bergsteinsen at Smart Trial by Greenlight and Brittany Smith at Greenlight Guru for a discussion on implementing and managing a connected post-market surveillance program throughout your product lifecycle. Today, we'll be hearing about understanding the regulatory requirements for post-market surveillance for quality regulatory product development and clinical teams, discover how to incorporate connectivity to streamline post-market surveillance, and uncover best practices for post-market surveillance. But first, a few housekeeping slides and some information on Galen Data. Galen Data is an FDA compliant cloud for medical device manufacturers. The Galen Cloud provides a configurable platform for device to cloud connectivity that is compliant to FDA, HIPAA, and CE mark standards. The company is ISO 13485 certified, and the product on AWS is high trust certified as well. Founded by seasoned medical device professionals, the company's goal is to make medical device cloud connectivity available to all at a fraction of the cost while shaving months off the development timeline. Galen Data allows medical device companies to stay medical device companies and not become IT companies. Some quick logistics you'll see on the slide here. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop those into the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. As they come up, there's a section for questions there that you can ask, and we'll ask Jan and Brittany those questions as we get to them. There's also a section for handouts there as well on your right-hand side. You'll see two handouts in there. And then if you also look at the chat, there are a few links to a blog post and a podcast episode that I did with Jan maybe a year and a half ago or longer. So with that being said, you'll receive a recording of the webinar via email, and feel free to follow up with us should you have any additional questions. With that being said, Jan and Brittany, the virtual floor is yours, and Jan, you can also correct me on how to properly say your name and not the Americanized way.
Awesome, thanks, Dwayne. So first off, we're just going to go over what the agenda is for this webinar. So we're going to do some introductions and then talk about why post-market surveillance matters, do an overview of PMS, and then we're going to go into the two different buckets of PMS, reactive versus proactive, talk a little bit about automating your QMS, and then go into the Q&A section. So to start out, some introductions. Jan, would you like to go first?
Sure, thanks, Brittany. Thanks, Dwayne. I'm Jan Bergsteinsen, formerly founder of Smart Trial, now part of Greenlight Guru. I'm leading the EMEA sales for clinical services for Greenlight. Been in the clinical affairs industry for now almost 10 years. So I've seen a number of post-market surveillance plans and strategies being developed together with our customers who have been implementing our services to support the data collection in that part of the life cycle. So I look forward to sharing some of that experience with you here today.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. And I'm Brittany Smith. I'm a medical device guru at Greenlight. I help customers implement and onboard with our software, as well as provide them with some industry knowledge. Prior to Greenlight, I spent 3 years in the industry. I served as CAPA manager. I did nonconformances, did a lot of complaint handling. So spent a lot of time and when I was in QA and RA with post-market surveillance. So I felt that was relevant to share why I was presenting today. So to just jump in a little bit just about what Greenlight Guru is, we help you connect your medtech lifecycle. So there's kind of three big buckets of our business. The first being our quality management system. So this is a EQMS built for the med device and med tech industry. So it is built for all of you that are developing medical devices. We also have our clinical data capture, which is where Jan and his team come in with the Smart Trial side. This is a medtech specific EDC, ECRF, EPRO, ECOA, surveys, case series, all of that can be taken care of in the clinical data capture. And then we also, we own the industry, not like training when it comes to the industry. We have our Greenlight Guru Academy, and this has courses and trainings in medtech regulations and standards, as well as helping you with how to use Greenlight as a customer. So digging into, why this topic today and why should you care about post-market surveillance? I pulled these headlines from either some really popular news outlets, the FDA itself. Here are just some really big recalls that have happened here recently. The Philips one was very recent. The breast implants in the top right is what infamously caused the MDR to come to be, because it was such a big recall. So you should care as a medical device company about post-market surveillance, because these are really big names, and a recall may not hurt their business. If you're a super big company, recalls are going to happen, and you want to make sure you have good post-market surveillance to catch things early, take care of them, make sure that they don't end up into the market. And if you're a small company, a recall like this may be the end of your company. So it's a super important thing to think about from the beginning of your journey developing a medical device. It is not an afterthought. When asked, when should I start my post-market surveillance? You want to be thinking about that, as soon as you have an idea of how you're going to be, what your device is going to be. It's never too early to think about post-market surveillance. So in terms of what is it, I pulled some definitions directly from the FDA and the MDR. So, feel free while I'm talking to read this. They're very similar. The MDR has a little additional information, but essentially it is a way for you to collect and interpret data that is coming in when your device is on the market. So, it's super important that the second your product is on the market, that you are taking any feedback you're getting, either from customers, from adverse events, from internal findings through nonconformances, that you are making sure you're looking at this, because when you do your risk management, you're looking at, occurrence of these type of events. And, were you correct when you did initial risk management? Are your rates accurate to what you're seeing? Are you seeing events that you never expected to see? Do you need to make updates to your design, your development, or any sort of your risk management? So, if there's super large discrepancies, how do you go about fixing them? Small, how do you address them? And making sure that you're taking this very seriously, because at the end of the day, we all want to improve the quality of life. That is why, we are in the industry. So making sure that you are taking post-market surveillance seriously and have processes in place to manage the data that's coming in. You may be asking, what processes are in your quality management system? So within your QMS, these are things like CAPA, nonconformance, complaint handling, internal audit. There are more processes that may be involved in post-market, but these are the big ones. I'm going to be hitting from the reactive and a little bit proactive with internal auditing. But both the FDA and ISO 13485 do include PMS requirements. So it is a requirement if you're marketing in the FDA, if you're going to any country that requires ISO 13485, or if you're going for your 13485 certification. And there is post-market surveillance in some sort, no matter where you're going. So making sure that you are looking at the regulations for that country and taking that in consideration. But we're mainly focused on the US and the MDR today. So that is why we have references to both of those throughout the presentation. I have experience in all four of these, and if you have robust processes, it'll make your life easier, but if you do not, it can be very challenging. So in terms of what are the expectations for the FDA versus the MDR. So with the FDA, this is a requirement for Class 2 and Class 3 devices that meet these three criteria. So if the failure of the device would lead to a serious adverse event, if they're implantable in humans for more than 1 year, if they're intended to be used outside a facility to support or sustain life. And then I also have just some additional types of post-market surveillance that you may see in addition to those ones on the previous slide, like your CAPAs and nonconformances. So the PMS takes a lot of different forms. So it's just making sure that you figure out what is applicable to your device and meet those requirements. For the MDR, Jan has made this fantastic graphic that goes through the different classifications and the different types of reports that you are going to be responsible for in the European market under the MDR. So you'll see things like a CER, a PMS plan that is required regardless of your classification of device, and your clinical evaluation report, just like it sounds, looking at your clinical side of things. Post-market surveillance plan is how are you going to be collecting post-market surveillance? How are you going to be analyzing it? How frequently? That all is covered on your plan. And then the report, this goes into your data associated, and the PMS report. This is what most, I would say, are familiar with, but with the MDR, class 2A, 2B, and 3 have taken a different form. I'm not going to spend too much time on PMCFs, plan and report, PCERs, or SSCPs, because I don't want to spoil any of Jan's half of the presentation, but just know your requirements, know your classification, and know what your expectation is, because if you've joined MDR webinars, or if you've heard, there's a big shift in what you're expected, where it used to be, we will ask you for information and you'll produce it, where it's a lot more of, you need to give us everything you have, and that's what we'll be reviewing. So it's longer the days where you wait for your notified body to ask you for a PCER or ask you for your PMS data. You're going to be expected to produce that up front. So it is a shift, and so just making sure that you are aware of what you are required to do is super important. Going into reactive PMS. So this is where I spent most of my time in the industry, RA, QA, and engineering. Reactive PMS was my life, and I like to call this fighting fires. And a lot of gurus on the team would call it the same thing. This is my favorite meme. If you have thought anything about reactive PMS, if you've lived this world, it just sometimes feel like the fire's all around you and you're just trying to get by. So this is things where an issue's been reported and you have to go about and address and fix the issue. So it's very much so reactive, that knee-jerk reaction of, we find out about something and we have to go and fix it. So the three big processes: complaint handling, CAPA, non-conformance. One thing on CAPA I just want to note is corrective action and preventive action. That is what it stands for. So there are CAPAs that are fully preventive, where you see an area for improvement, and in that sense it would be your proactive PMS. However, in my experience, majority of CAPAs come from something reactive, and you may see an opportunity and be able to go further than just what you're doing to fix the problem. So your complaint handling is any sort of feedback you're getting from the field of, it's not working correctly, it broke when it was implanted. Your adverse events come from here. CAPAs, a lot of times these come from audit findings. It comes from systemic issues within your company, within your QMS. And then non-conformances, these can be both process and products, but my experience came from your product non-conformances, where you get something back from your manufacturer and your supplier, and something's out of specification, something's not right. And so then, you're still doing that reactive state. So in terms of what are your reporting requirements when it comes to reactive post-market surveillance? So when you have a complaint received, you have to determine if regulatory reporting is required. And this is where it's super important to understand your geography's requirements, because they do differ geography by geography. So again, we're touching on EU and US today, but there are more that are out there and what you're required to do based on classification and the type of event that's happening. But for the FDA, if you determine that reporting is required, you do have to submit those adverse events to the MOD database, which stands for Manufacturer and User Facility Device Experience. And something that I always like to point out when I talk about the MOD database is the fact it's manufacturer and user facility. So things can get reported here that you may never have heard about. There's no, if something happens in the field, hopefully you have a really good chain of communication with your reps, with your surgeons, but sometimes you don't find out about things, and the best way to find it is the MOD database. So when you're putting together post-market surveillance reports, when you're analyzing your data, make sure you look at MOD and not just what you know about, because there may have been something reported that you did not know. So just always keeping that in mind. Throwing out another regulation, TGA in Australia, they actually encourage, you're supposed to, regardless if you're the manufacturer or not, you're supposed to go and submit adverse events. So making sure that you are looking at the databases, looking at the data that's available, and making sure that anything that happened where you are the manufacturer, you are analyzing and making sure that everything on your end, from a risk and from a documentation side, a design side, is all still accurate and there's no updates required. For the EU, there is the UTMED database. So this is European Union database on medical devices. One big note with UTMED, it is still a voluntary submission period. It has not been mandated yet. So there's the modules. There's 6 different modules. The big one to focus for this topic is the vigilance and post-market surveillance. So if you are planning to CE mark your device in the future, if you are currently CE marking your device, making sure you understand what your requirements are for UTMED, because each module has a different timeline of when you are required. The last time I looked, I believe the vigilance and post-market, the mandate date is 2024, but I do not know if that will change. So just make sure you're keeping up to date and keeping an eye on, on LinkedIn, on the regulations, and seeing when things are being mandated. But the goal of UTMED and the goal overall of the MDR is just to improve transparency and coordinate the information on medical device and diagnostics. So whenever I'm talking about the MDR, I was on an MDR team, and I know it is a big lift, but just keeping in mind that the goal is for that transparency and the coordination of the information. So the end goal and the whole reason it came about with making sure we're looking at devices properly, we're addressing everything that needs to be before big events happen. And that's the big thing with, when you're able to get to a state where you're not just doing all of this reactive PMS, it really does allow you to foster innovation. And it also just ensures that when your devices go out your doors, you can trust that you have put the best quality device out on the market. Because I have lived in a world where, things weren't caught early and massive recalls happen. And it takes a lot of people to address those recalls and to make sure it's happening, to make sure that your patients they're still able to get your devices and they're able to still get what you're trying to provide to them. So to go into some best practices, these are not all of best practices, but these are the 3 that I really wanted to touch on and share some stories. So define processes, have your PMS procedures that are robust, and have your company train on them. Every single person in your company, in my opinion, should be trained on complaints, because you never know how you're going to receive a complaint. I've received complaints over Snapchat with a rep, and I needed to know what to do with that information. I needed to go take that, got a picture of an implant that broke in surgery on an x-ray. So then I had to make sure that complaint was submitted. I've seen, you get a phone call to your main company line, and so your front desk person, if it doesn't get transferred to customer service, for example, that person needs to know what chain of command they need to do to make sure that your complaints are, submitted properly and are being looked at correctly and by the right people. So you need to make sure that your whole company understands the process, so that no matter the relationships that have been built, if your CEO is best friends with one of your surgeons and one of your reps, that even if the CEO gets let known of a complaint, that it still goes through the proper process, so that you're not dropping everything for every complaint that comes in. You're able to properly triage the complaints that come in. You're able to prioritize what are the most critical complaints that we need to address. And you also know it was this user error, because that sometimes does happen, where it wasn't anything with your device, it wasn't anything with the instructions, it was off-label use, or your patient was non-compliant in how they were supposed to be doing recovery. So maybe they were supposed to be non-weight bearing, and then they were weight bearing and the implant broke. When you go through your complaint investigation, you're able to uncover those things. But if you don't uncover it, you may not realize that maybe there's a weak part of your device that you need to address. The next thing is resource management. I think it's so important that you have enough people in place to manage PMS efficiently and correctly. It is so important when your device is in the market that you have enough people to take care of these processes, because a lot of work goes into CAPA, non-conformance, complaint handling. And if you don't have enough people, it's just going to keep piling up, and you're never going to get out of this reactive state, because a company isn't successful if they just have none of those things. You may have the best device on the market, you're still going to get complaints, you're still going to find non-conformances, you're still going to have CAPAs, because at the end of the day, we are all human, and there are always areas for improvement. So if you're like, oh, we have none of those, maybe dig deeper and look at your, everything about your device and see, are there areas for improvement, and could we be doing more? And or maybe are we just not finding out about these things? Are these things happening and we just don't have the right procedures in place to make sure we're getting that information? So And sometimes if if you're the complaint handler, that's not the easiest job because you're having to listen to people complain every day. But if you have a team surrounding you that, you guys are all there together to tackle complaints, it can be a lot easier when if you're just by yourself, it is a big burden. So making sure that you just have, if you have the ability to put more resources towards any group, I'm a little biased since I worked in this this part of the industry. So, but if you can give more resources, it never hurts. And then the quality mindset. I helped moderate a whole session during our virtual summit with Greenlight about quality over compliance. And this is something that I have personally seen what happens if you just have a compliance mindset. So compliance is getting through the next audit, just getting by, just doing enough to cross your T's and dot your I's. And there's really no innovation. You're just trying to meet the different regulations that you're in charge of. And it's kind of a bare minimum mindset where quality is, it's top down. It's not just compliance. It's finding a way to have that cross-functional collaboration so that engineering is always thinking about, how do we make this the highest quality? It's not just quality's job to have quality in your organization. And so I've seen what happens when quality is just the bad guy. Quality is the one that's the roadblock. But if you can get to a mindset where it is from the CEO down to your line, like everyone on the manufacturing line, it is on everyone to have this mindset of quality, so that for every single person is operating to your the highest standards and making sure that you're creating the safest devices, no corners are being cut, and we're not just doing things because it's quicker or because it costs less. There's that quality triangle of time, cost, and quality, and making sure that you're meeting more in the middle to make, you're getting things out in a timely manner, you're being cost efficient, but you're not doing it at the sacrifice of quality. So, I'm very passionate about the most successful companies have quality over compliance. And I know Greenlight has articles about, what is the difference, what it looks like to be in a quality mindset. And I lived in a lot of that compliance of, we would get through the audit, we wouldn't have a lot of non-conformances. So, from a top level, it looked like it was highly successful, but us on the team know we had a lot of areas for improvement, but we're never able to get past this reactive state to really innovate and create processes that allow for things to not happen in the future. So if I can give you any advice, start to look in what that looks like. Devote resources and time. Time is money. So putting time into your post-market program is just so valuable to a company long term.
Thank you, Brittany. So we decided before the webinar that we were going to split it up a little bit because essentially when you look at post-market surveillance top down, it is split up into two pieces mainly. It's the reactive part and then the proactive part. And now I'm going to share a bit more insights on how you can facilitate efficient and helpful proactive post-market surveillance. The main opportunity for proactive post-market surveillance lies in the different activities that can be considered proactive post-market surveillance, because depending on the regulatory environment that you're complying towards, whether it's the European Union or other countries in Europe or the US, North America, or other locations, there are activities that you will need to implement in your organization to comply with the minimal requirements of post-market surveillance. This includes, for example, post-approval studies or post-approval authorization activities that the FDA might ask you to conduct after you've received a market access approval. This could also be PMCF activities under the EU MDR. And if we go into details of PMCF, this can be anything from a clinical study that you actually sponsor or co-sponsor together with an investigator or a group of investigators, or this could be as simple as a clinical focused customer survey. General customer surveys are also considered post-market surveillance. Customer surveys are becoming more and more popular amongst medical device companies because companies are starting to understand that selling a medical device requires as much of a hands-on and understanding of the market and its needs as any other product that we're selling in the market. So customer surveys are becoming more popular in the industry to gather general information in terms of the uses of the devices, but also information that could be helpful for post-market surveillance. Focus groups are also and can be considered post-market surveillance. Companies, typically larger ones that might have a larger portfolio, might have a large R&D division, or companies that are very focused on scientific research and development of their products, they typically arrange key opinion leader strategies or focus groups with key opinion leaders where information and feedback on the product is considered, is collected on a yearly or a 6-month or 18-month basis. And any and all information that's shared during these kind of focus groups or conversations can be considered post-market surveillance, and if documented correctly, can fulfill the minimal requirements of documented such an activity. And lastly, but not least, registries have been very popular for long-term implantable devices for years, especially in the orthopedic industry. Depending on the device and the popularity of that device, the quality and amount of data and information in these registries can be very different. Some states or countries have even started to implement local registries to keep track of standard or typical implants that are used in very common surgeries. But all of this can be considered proactive post-market surveillance. Please, next slide. The thing is, though, it doesn't really matter which activity we are considering implementing in our post-market surveillance system or program. The idea behind post-market surveillance is to exemplify that what's happening in reality concurs with what we've described in our technical file. And I'm not going to be stating that one of the activities that were mentioned here today is better than the other, because to be honest, it very much depends on the story that you want to, or the story that you have told in your technical file about your product, and the story that you're trying to make about your device in the market, on which activity might suit your device or organization best. But when it comes to post-market surveillance, and specifically the proactive part of it, it is at all times, well, the focus of it is most of the time is to collect the information that's needed to confirm what you've demonstrated or documented in your technical file. The fact is that reality isn't always what we consider it to be. And like Brittany mentioned before, a lot of things can happen. We're humans, and because we have a medical device that's being handled by a person, there can be a lot of additional factors on top of what we have described in our technical files that can impact the use of it in practice. So it is our responsibility to implement activities that can demonstrate that we're actually performing and considered as safe as we're describing in our technical file. Next slide, please. So we already saw this matrix before when we touched upon the reactive parts, but I think it's important to highlight once more that even though your device class is class 1, it doesn't mean that, for example, under the EU MDR, you don't have to do any PMCF. And the same goes for higher risk devices. Even though you have quite extensive clinical data, for example, on your device, it doesn't mean that you do not have to conduct a PMCF activity of some sort. The EU MDR is very specific on the fact that you need to have a PMS plan and you need to have a PMCF plan, but based on what you have described in your clinical evaluation and technical file in general, there can and cannot be a requirement to implement additional activities to gather supportive data on your clinical efficacy or safety. When it comes to the FDA, and Brittany mentioned this before, there's a difference, of course, in how we treat proactive and reactive activities under the FDA requirements in North America. But what's important, though, is that both regulatory environments, they consider PMS a crucial part of getting a product to market. And you need to have a post-market surveillance system. How and whether that includes any proactive activities depends on how you get the product to market and how you have, well, what the data you have created or presented in your technical file or market submissions to to explain or confirm that your device is performing in an intended way. So please, next slide. So thinking about how connectivity and automation can be thought into the post-market surveillance program for your organization very much depends on what you need to accomplish. Because if you have a super simple device and you have very few instances of it being used in market, you might not have to implement an extensive post-market surveillance, proactive post-market surveillance program. However, if you're like many of the other devices that are out there in the market that you are, selling a number of those devices, you are seeing, sales numbers increase. You maybe have another product in the pipeline. The need to optimize the process of post-market surveillance becomes more important the longer your device is in the market and the more sales you have. And starting off on the right side of things is crucial because, like Brittany mentioned before, if you don't build on top of quality from day one, it is a house of bricks that is waiting to fall at some point. So what can you do to automate this process and try to connect your post-market surveillance program together with the rest of the organization? Well, interestingly enough, there are solutions out there that have started to support this part, and especially when it comes to medical devices that have some kind of a software component to it, there's an opportunity arising in the industry to start utilizing that for post-market surveillance as well. Please, next slide, Brittany. So when it comes to best practices for proactive post-market surveillance, we need to start thinking digital first. It is not efficient to have people going out to clinics every 3 or 4 months, gathering information, paying for flight tickets, paying for hotels, paying for dinners, interviews, losing data in a briefcase that got lost in the airport, or having discrepancies in data points between sites or clinicians, depending on how well the documentation was produced, is just no longer acceptable. Implementing solutions that can support, first of all, the data collection part is crucial, because at any point when it comes to post-market surveillance, the information that you gather needs to get into a computer at some point, because you will produce a report at some point that will go into your QMS. And having paper-based data collection systems for your post-market surveillance, even though it's Word, a document, or a PDF document, at some point a person needs to review that document at some point and transcribe it into something else or stop analyzing it. So thinking about implementing digital platforms to manage and collect reactive and proactive data throughout the life cycle is important. And for that part, there are solutions out there that are becoming more popular amongst medical device companies, such as the solutions that we offer at Greenlight, where people are starting to implement those in their post-market surveillance process to gather data directly from consumers or ad hoc when needed. Compliance and validation is a crucial part of it, because everything you implement in your life cycle needs to comply with minimal requirements for validation. When we talk about clinical data, which is becoming more and more popular in post-market surveillance or post-market clinical follow-up in the European Union, being able to demonstrate that you are complying with data collection for good clinical practice for data collection is becoming more important. So selecting platforms that can support data acquisition and compliance with good clinical practice is crucial. If you have activities in Europe, notified bodies have started questioning digital tools, survey tools, and other tools that are off-the-shelf kind of tools used for data gathering, because of the fact that if it's not validated, you cannot really be 100% sure that that survey that you send out to 1,000 individuals actually resulted in this data that you're looking at. You might think it's stupid, but that's the view that the notified bodies, for example, Europe, have towards that. The first question they usually ask is, okay, great, you did a customer survey that resulted in this data point, but was that survey tool you used validated? Were you able to demonstrate that 1 didn't turn into a 2, for example? So that's just a thing to have in mind. And then second of all, when you start building up your EQMS and you start producing your first reports and you start generating documents and templates of work instructions, SOPs that relate to post-market surveillance, you start implementing those in a proactive and a reactive manner. You need to think about more than just your market approval. You need to think about how does this look like when we are 10 devices out there in the market? How does it look like when we have hundreds of devices out there in the market? How does it look like when we have 10 years down the line, millions of dollars of revenue and thousands of devices implemented in people? Does the model that we're working, or the method that we're implementing right now, work? Will it cost us more time and effort if we don't start automating things that should be automated? And that's where it becomes important to link this into the product lifecycle. How do we interact or connect this with marketing, sales, quality assurance, regulatory affairs? This thought process is very important, and it kind of links to what Brittany said before in terms of quality, starting with quality. You need to implement this mindset of being able to take upon quality as one of the crucial supporting supporting activities also in the post-market stage. Next slide, please. So automating post-market surveillance. Well, like I mentioned before, there are, of course, specific devices that are specifically software as medical device or devices that have a software component to it that have advantages when it comes to automating post-market surveillance procedures. Post-market surveillance includes both reactive and prospective activities. And when you have those kind of devices that have a software component to them, there are options to start automating post-market surveillance activities together with your device being used out there in the market. For example, if you include clinical engineering or let alone quality or regulatory influence in your product development and start thinking about post-market surveillance from day one, there is a possibility to start identifying, for example, inputs and outputs that your device might generate that could have an influence on surveillance in the market. Sorry. So for example, if your device is producing certain outputs that based on the conversation you had with your clinical engineering and quality teams, could result in a safety event of some sort, or potentially result in a safety event of some sort because you know and understand your device best, having an automated process that maybe sends out a questionnaire or raises a flag from your QA team to at least check up on it, it could be very helpful. It could even save lives if done appropriately. Instead of having to wait for that implant or device to break, is it possible to start analyzing the torque that's placed on a certain element of your device, measure that somehow, and then provide that feedback to the central database in order to evaluate for any potential hazards? Those kind of thoughts have to be put in place in your design and development phase. It requires a different approach to development, and some people might think this being an additional cost. But if you think about it, post-market surveillance can kill your organization and your sales if a terrible story comes out in the media. So being observant of that early on can help you implement features and functionalities in your platform that could potentially eliminate that risk. I'm seeing more companies thinking ahead with implementing machine learning and AI features, smart features in their platforms to identify risks. And this could be even as simple as asking a question or two additionally on top of what might be considered standard practice of using your device to help understand the use of the device better. There are multiple cases where I've heard of devices being used out there in the industry, and they might have a software component to them where a certain action was done and the device produced an error of some sort. But because that error wasn't fed back to the manufacturer, nothing was done about it. But then again, later on, the user or the customer reported a complaint. but that complaint could have been handled a lot earlier and maybe taken care of a lot sooner if the system could have provided any, proactive feedback towards the manufacturer earlier. And there are ways that you can automate this, think of it with, for example, putting surveys in place with your data collection tools or your software as a medical device itself. Machine learning and AI is a way to address some of these inputs, but then again, often or not, you need to validate those mechanisms as well, which can be a little bit tricky. But if you start implementing features in your not only your products but also in your processes that facilitate the possibility of gathering feedback from the market proactively, you will have a lot easier time making sure that you can comply with post-market surveillance, because you don't have to do it reactively, but rather you can have it automated and save time and money, both from resources that you spend, but also from your customer side, customer side as well. There's also integration opportunities starting to open up from EQMS solutions, where you can start communicating with those options as well. This can also introduce additional benefits, which can relate to, for example, facilitating easy reporting, not only to authorities but also internal reporting for quality assurance purposes. Next, please. So, key takeaways. I guess we can both agree on that working on post-market surveillance programs early on is a crucial factor. And having a connected system is something that a lot of companies have not had a chance to do because there have not been solutions available to them. But now we're seeing the importance of starting to integrate different solutions together in the product lifecycle will make a huge difference towards not only the product development, but also the post-market activities. And Brittany, you mentioned understand your device and users.
Yeah, you brought up something. With links of it well. With if you have a big event, you may have issues with your use, like the sales reps and the surgeons. There's that whole aspect of perceived quality of if you're consistently having issues happen and people aren't seeing you take initiative and correct them or handle them seriously, that can really impact your sales and your business. So understand your device, understand how it can fail. How are you going to track if it does fail? How are you going to see, are we seeing things that could lead to failure, and can we make enhancements before it fails? And understanding your users to make sure that they know, one, they feel empowered to tell you when things go wrong and when they happen, but also that when they notify you, you're going to do things to make sure that if enhancements are needed, that you're taking care of it. So it's just making sure that you have that synergy from both your internal team, your external customers, because your internal team is a customer and your external team is a customer. You want to make sure that there's synergy, there's good communication, to where people feel if the surgeon has an improvement idea, they feel like they can come to you, versus if they already had 20 open complaints with you, why would they reach out if they had an enhancement, if they're already waiting for you to take care of other issues?
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's all we had. So now it's time for some Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you both. We had a couple questions come in while you all were talking here, so let me pull those up. The first one was, how do you use customer surveys or focus groups for a B2B medical device manufacturer that doesn't have direct contact with end consumers?
That's a good question. I think it would be important to figure out how you get communication with those end users. So
there's always an end user. There's always a key opinion leader. There's always a clinical user at some point for a medical device, in most cases. But sending out a survey if you're an OEM producer or a device manufacturer to device manufacturer kind of a relationship, you probably have to include a clinical expert at some point if you want to get some real data. or end user expert at some point to get some real data. But then again, if you're selling B2B, when it comes to, for example, if you're selling to a distributor and then there's a distributor that sells your product and you never get a hold of the end user, you have to make that channel. You have to open up a channel between you and your distributor that will enable that.
And to that, your end user may be that distributor or that next level manufacturer. So having a communication of, if they find out about something that's wrong with your device, that you have that chain of connection, because the distributor at the end of this, they have to have supplier controls in mind. So it may be, just making sure that your end user, which is that next line, that they're communicating with you.
Okay, awesome. Another question that came in was, can you expand a little on what automated reporting looks like?
So automated reporting is a very broad term. The reports themselves that are produced by, for example, the quality teams of the CABA teams or whoever is taking care of the reports that are then put into a QMS system usually is one thing. But reporting of a complaint or reporting of a issue of some sort is another thing. And automating that part can be done, for example, with, if you have a software component in your device that can detect something at the time of the event, sending out a survey or a questionnaire to follow up on that event with the end user could be very helpful. Having the possibility for the end user to ad hoc in reporting that event to you, which will then produce some sort of a cascade of events that can produce additional reports or documents, is also possible. But in the end, there's also always a human factor at play here, which needs to look at the event and then consider it to be X, Y, or Z, which then need to be filed in your QMS.
Yeah, and looking on the more reactive process side, within Greenlight, there is a way to automate the processes. So, for example, if for every time you get a product nonconformance, an action you take is to determine disposition, we do have capabilities where you can automate certain tasks relating to post-market quality processes. So there's two sides of it, and depending on what you're using and how you're able to implement these processes, there's ways to automate both what Jan had talked through and then like your processes themselves.
Very cool. What kind of information can hold on one second. What kind of information can we gather from registries?
Lots. Simple answer. My experience with registries was for the MDR, we had a relationship with a children's hospital in Canada where we were going to have access to the clinical data associated to our device so that we could compile the PMCF, the PCERs, because our device was implantable. So, you're looking at if there's revision surgeries, what kind of implications, like what kind of future things are happening when your device is being implanted, recovery times, hospital stays. There's a lot of different things from the clinical side that you can gather. It just kind of depends on what you need the data for, because an implantable device is going to need very different, or even if maybe you have a short-term implantable, so it's supposed to be taken out, is it being taken out in the right period of time? So just, it really, I hate to say it depends, but it does depend what data you need for your different PMS reports.
To be honest, what I've seen so far is that registries don't always contain the exact data that a manufacturer might need. It might contain a lot of information, in general information that, for example, governments or researchers might be interested in. When it comes to you as a manufacturer, you need some specific outcome measures and specific endpoints that you need to make sure that concur with your technical file or clinical evaluation. Sometimes those parameters are just not a part of what's collected in a registry. So, yeah.
Awesome. This is a probably an ambiguous question, but when do you think post-market surveillance will actually become mandated? It seems like the deadline continues to be pushed back. So I think that there's probably a lot of answers to this, but go ahead.
Jan, do you want to start or do you want me to?
Sure. So when it comes to the EU MDR, the post-market surveillance requirement has always been there. It's not being pushed. And if we're referring to the timeline that's being pushed, that's the integration timeline for existing CE mark devices under the old directive in Europe. So the post-market surveillance requirements are there. They will continue to be there. The only thing that has changed is the requirement for existing devices transitioning from their existing CE mark to a EU MDR CE mark.
Yeah, and from an FDA standpoint as well, always it's a requirement. So what you're doing may look different in your markets, but you need to be doing post-market surveillance. And maybe one thing where it might be a little confusing of like the UTMED side of things, UTMED is still voluntary basis. However, you still need to be doing those processes. So you're not having to set, like with the FDA, for example, using UDI, which is not the topic here, but UDI and the FDA, you submit a good ID. That's essentially what UTMED's UDI is hoping to accomplish, but it's still voluntary to submit. Same thing with post-market surveillance. You need to be doing it, but you may not have to do that vigilance reporting to UTMED yet. So, you know, that again, last time I checked was 2024. The dates change a lot. So, you know, keep an eye on it, but that side of things have not been mandated, but post-market surveillance as a whole is mandated.
Okay, awesome. Two topics that had come up, I don't know if they're necessarily questions, but they were pre-writes in. And so we had discussed some of these prior to, but anonymized data versus individualized data and corresponding regulatory requirement tools to collect data, ECRF in parentheses. Anything else to really add? I don't know if we've exactly hit on this during the presentation.
Yeah, so when it comes to post-market surveillance and particularly clinical data, there are data protection regulations that you need to take into account in Europe, the EU GDPR. In the US, you have the HIPAA, and for example, the Californian regulation on data, personal data. And in all cases, it's important that if you're collecting any information on a personal level, on a patient level, that you only collect the applicable information you need at any given time. And if so, especially in Europe, you might need to have a consent, an EU GDPR consent in place if you want to collect the data. The tool that you select to collect the data, if it's, for example, if it's a post-market surveillance study or a PMCF study in Europe, you might use an ECRF, electronic case report form, to collect the data. So typically it's a physician that enters data into a system, and then after a month's period of time, you might have some data sets that are, you know, possibly to analyze and use for PMCF or post-market studies. Those systems need to have the applicable requirements in place, for example, good clinical practice requirements.
Okay, awesome. I don't think there are any other questions or, oh, no, just kidding. One more. How does the CER interact with PMS activities?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jan. But what you put in your CER, your PMS data will prove that it is. I mean, it's kind of like with the, you know, with your risk side of your device development, what you say, you have to prove that that's what's actually happening. Your PMS data will help you make future updates to the CER as needed. So, you know, when you have to pull data and have clinical information for that CER, but you are then going to use your post-market data for updates and maintenance of your CER.
Yes, so essentially your post-market surveillance program, depending on your classification in Europe, will have a requirement to have a post-market surveillance post-market clinical follow-up plan, and those activities that you might initiate generate information and data, and then that information needs to be fed into a clinical evaluation report that might need to be updated, depending on the information that you collect. So, for example, like Brittany said, if your post-market surveillance program shows that your device is not as effective as you documented in your CER, you need to update your CER.
Okay, perfect. One more did roll in, and then I promise I'll let you go after that. And this is probably one of these ones where it might be best if they follow up with both of you afterwards. I'll still ask it just in case someone else is in a similar situation and you want to expand on it. But this person had asked, we have 20 plus class 1 devices with 10 plus variations. Do they each need their own PMS/PMCF report? What kind of questions will be asked to help where to draw the line? So maybe not so much of a direct answer, but what's your thought process here, I guess?
I have an idea. Or I have been asked a similar question before, and I even heard a notified body answer a question like this before, and they said 1 technical file, 1 PMCF plan.
That's what I
So
would
if you
say.
have 20 products with 20 different technical files, you need to have 20 different PMCF plans.
Yeah, it really depends on if one tech file and one, the PMS data, if it covers those variations, I would be curious on what the variations are. If they're like completely different intended use, then you may need to look into maybe additional. But in my experience, we grouped our technical files by systems, so by like product families. So if your devices are being used, I would say probably 1 and 1, unless the variations are huge.
And I think it's also important to note that even though you might have 20 different technical files with 10 to 20 different PMCF plans, they might be 95.9% alike. It doesn't mean you need to initialize 20 different activities. You could still have one activity, and based on how you structure that data collection setup, for example, a survey, you can collect information on all of those products. But I would be curious to understand whether a class 1 device actually requires a PMCF activity or not. It's in many cases you can justify not to for low risk devices.
Okay, great. All right. Well, that being said, for anyone who's still on, if you have any other questions for Brittany or Jan, you can see the contact information for Greenlight on the screen now. You can also see the contact information for Galen, should you have any additional questions for Galen data. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of this was our 29th installment. If you go to Galen Data's website, Galen Data's YouTube channel, you can see a lot of the old webinars that we have done previously. Actually, one of which that Jan was already on at some point last year. So with that being said, stay tuned for our March announcement of when we will be having our March webinar. And thanks everyone for joining. And Brittany, Jan, thanks for your time today as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.